Okay, thank you all for joining us on this beautiful evening of white snow outside. Right, it's always Torah never stops. So Baruch Hashem, we're able to. They cleared the roads enough that we're able to come here in person. And for those that are out there at home, Torah never stops. We always learn Torah when we can. So this week's parsha is Parshah Vayechi, page 268 in the ArtScroll Chumash, in the blue ArtScroll Chumash, and starts with the end of chapter 47. So Parshas Vayechi, it says Vayechi Yaakov, and Yaakov lived, right? And it goes and speaks about his age. Mitzrayim lived in Mitzrayim Shvas, a son of 17 years. And then it says Vayimei Yaakov, it was the years of Yaakov Snei Chayev, the years of his life. Sheva Shanim, 7 years, Varbayim Me'as Shana, and Varbayim U'Me'as Shana. So 147 years. Yaakov lived for 147. He was a youngster compared to his father and his grandfather. Right? They lived longer years. Right? They either 160 or 170. We have to look it up again exactly. What Yitzchak lived 180. Right, so he lived a little less than his parents, his father. It's still, that's how long he lived. So I just want to talk about something very interesting. There's a fascinating, interesting discussion that happens over here, where if you go turn the page for a second, and this is actually in the Torah, it's like this also, right? There's no, at the end of next week's parsha, there's no letter pei or samach, right? Usually if you go, right, if you, let's say, go turn back the page to the end of Parshas Vayechi, Miketz, on page 248, you'll see that at the end of the parsha, there's 3 samachs, right? At the end, page 248, there's 3 samachs. And the same as by all parshios, right? Almost all parshios. It's called, it sort of blocks it, right? And it sort of shows the difference between one parsha to the next parsha, right? Either samach or pei, and also we have it a lot of times in middle of the parsha, right? You find the pei or samach. Usually it's 1, and that sort of shows that there's a separation between this piece of the Torah and the next piece of the Torah. And for the trup, when one is learning the Torah, it also, you come to sort of more of a stop, right? Now, it doesn't mean to say it's the end of the Aliyah when you're learning the Torah, but it sort of tells you to sort of stop for a second, right? Sort of make that separation and then continue. And you find it almost at every end of every parsha, either samach or pei. We're very interesting. This week's parsha, the end of last week's parsha, there's nothing, right? There's nothing there. There's no samach nor pei, right? And the end of this week's parsha, Vayechi, on page 288, even though it's the end of a sefer of Bereshis, we say chazak, but again, there's no samach or no pei, right? So the commentaries want to know, this is called a parsha stuma, a parsha that is hidden. Sasu means to say like closed, means to say that it doesn't show the beginning and it doesn't show the end. It's sort of just, in the way it's read, when we stop because it's the end of the parsha, but the way it's read or the way it's written in the Torah, there's no separation between the end of Parshas Vayigas to the beginning of Parshas Vayechi, and the end of Parshas Vayechi to the beginning of Parshas Shemos, right? So, and Rashi already speaks about this. It's the Talmud speaks about this. The Midrash speaks about it. The Medrash speaks about it, right? But it's called a Parshas Stuma, a parsha that is hidden. And the question is, why is this week's parsha a Parshas Stuma? Why is it a parsha that is hidden, where can't see the beginning and you can't see the end? Why is it a hidden parsha? So Rashi tells you, right? Rashi tells us, Kiva and Shinifter Yaakov, since Yaakov Avinu passed away, so we're back on page 268, right? Since Yaakov passed away, Nistam Aneim Valibim Yisrael Mitzaras Hashibud. Because since Yaakov passed away in this week's parsha, so the eyes and the heart, of the Jewish people sort of closed up. Nistamu sort of was closed, became hidden, right? Because of the shibud of the galus, of the exile, because of the hardship of the exile, right? So Yischilu Lavodasim, because they started the exile of Mitzrayim, right? The galus Mitzrayim, the first exile as a nation that the Jewish people had. Galus Mitzrayim. That's why this parsha is to allude to this Yaakov passing this week's parsha, and therefore that's why it is a hidden parsha. So we can't find the beginning, we can't find the end. The Jewish people also couldn't find where they were. They were in exile. They were in struggling. They were in pain from the exile. So, yeah, very nice. So that's what Rashi quotes. Rashi then gives another answer, which I don't want to talk about today. Right? But Ramosha Feinstein asks, and many others ask this question also. They say, 1 second. This week's parsha, Yaakov dies, but the exile, the exile of Mitzrayim, the avoda, the hard work, doesn't start until Parsha Shemos. And the Medrash tells us that it didn't start until all the 12 tribes passed away. Right? Until Yosef and his brothers passed away, right? There's no hardship, there's no slavery. Right? They were living in Mitzrayim, but they were still well-to-do. They were still considered, first-class citizens. Right? They were not enslaved in any way. Right? They still had businesses and rode around and did whatever they needed to do. So the commentaries ask, a very nice Yaakov died, but it's not when Yaakov died, right, that the hardship of the exile actually started. The hardship of the exile started, right, after all the brothers died. Right, so why does Rashi say that it's since Yaakov dies, right? And again, Rashi's quoting the Gemara. Right, why does it say that when Yaakov died, and therefore there was a hardship of the exile, and therefore their eyes and their hearts were closed, and that's why it's a closed period. It didn't start until after all the brothers died, right? And not until the Parshah Shemos. And so Parshah Shemos should be a sasim, right, from the beginning and the end, right? It's not. At the end of the Parshah Shemos has a pei or a samach there, right? So that is a question that Ramosha Feinstein asks and many other commentaries ask. Ramosha Feinstein says something very powerful, and I want to talk about this for a few minutes. And others say something similar, so we're going to combine. We're going to take Ramosha Feinstein, we're going to combine what other people say also, Sfas Emes, Rabbi Shamson Falhurst, right? They all say a similar thing, but in sort of a little different ways. And they say like this, they say, Ramosha Feinstein, the way he puts it down is like this. He says that the exile really started when they came down to Mitzrayim. They were in a foreign land. We spoke about last week. They said, Lagur Banu, we came to live, temporary, right? They realized that they were in a temporary land, and they realized that this was not where they were supposed to be. And that's what they told Yaakov. They told. And as long as Yaakov was living, they were able to live on that kind of philosophy. And they realized that they were in a temporary place, and they realized that this was not their homeland, and they were going to be here for however many years that they have to live here, but they were here because there was a famine, and they realized that, but they lived in that way. And therefore, since as long as Yaakov lived, and Yaakov was able to inspire his descendants, right, the 12 tribes and all their children, right, by the end of his life, there were more than 70, because there were 70 when he came down in 17 years, right? Imagine they probably were more in a few hundreds already, right? Probably even more, right? So, but Yaakov was still able to sort of inspire, and the Hebrew word is mashpia, and he was able to inspire and to make sure that his family and his descendants and Jewish people, right, were able to still live on that philosophy. But when he passed away, right, his presence was missed and his influence was missed. Of course, the 12 tribes were also very lofty, and of course, they were trying to inspire the rest of their descendants, right? But it's already getting even bigger, right? It was probably now a few hundred, maybe even 1,000, right? People, and they had a lot of children, so it was even more, and it was sort of spreading out. So the Jewish people sort of lost that, and they felt that they were part of the Egyptian culture, and they started like acting like Egyptians and being like Egyptians. So yes, the actual slavery didn't start for another a few years, probably even longer, right? There was still, I think, Levi was the last one to pass away, right? It was probably another good 50 to almost 70 years. There's actually a calculation, and I forgot to look it up, so I apologize, right? But it was a good few years longer, and so there was even more people. But the Jewish people at the time started sort of getting influenced by the people that they were. And therefore, says the commentaries that the shibud, the exile, right, happened, right? So after Yaakov passed away, this hardship of the exile, there's two different kind of hardships of an exile, right? There's a hardship of an exile of when we're persecuted, Holocaust and inquisitions and terrorist attacks. That's a hardship of the exile. And then there's a hardship of an exile also of when we lose our way and we get influenced by the society that we're in and we become that culture and we lose our spiritual connection. And therefore, says Rashi that this parsha is sussum, it's hidden. It's because when Yaakov passed away, the eyes and the hearts of the Jewish people sort of became, they started the shibu, they started the slavery of Egypt. Yes, it wasn't the physical slavery of Egypt, but they were influenced, but the slavery of Egypt of the spiritual, the slavery of the spirituality, that they were enslaved spiritually, that became infected by the culture of Egypt and became more like Egyptians. And that started then, and that's why it's considered that that's when the exile started, and that's why this week's parsha is sussum. Right, so again, this reinforces what we've talked about in the past. So it brings it out in a phenomenal way, right? That the exile was considered an exile, right? When they started losing their way spiritually, right? Yes, then a few years, maybe 50 to 100 years later, right? The actual physical slavery started, right? But the exile is considered the exile when they lost their spiritual way and they started becoming influenced by that society. And that's why, excuse me, that's why this parsha of Sussum is hidden. We can't find the beginning, can't find the end, because the Jewish people lost their way too, right? In this Egyptian exile, that's why they lost their way. And that's what the commentaries say. Now, this is a little twist, and again, we're not in any way saying why things happen, but the commentaries do point this out, 2020 hindsight. And I forgot who says this. One of the commentaries say that the reason why there was the physical exile was because the Jewish people lost their way after Yaakov Avinu passed away and lost their spiritual way and became more Egyptian. If they would have been able to hold on to Yaakov, the influence that Yaakov was having on them, and to hold on to say, no, we're lugger, we're still tough, even though we're here for 100 years, this is a temporary place, this is not where we're supposed to be. Right? We have to live in the Egyptian culture, but we don't become Egyptians. Right? If they would have been able to hold on to that, then they might not have been the physical exile of the slavery that we speak about in the beginning of Parshas Shemos. Right? There might not have been that, right? Because then, since they were accepting the exile as an exile, right, and realized that they were in exile, so God didn't have to make them realize that it was an exile. Right, but since they lost their way, and that happened after Yaakov Avinu passed away, right? So that is what caused, even though the physical exile only happened maybe 50 to 75 years later, right? But it was caused because after Yaakov Avinu passed away, they lost their way and they became infected spiritually, and therefore that's why the physical exile happened. So it's a similar idea, but it just adds another, as we would say in Yiddish, another knetch. Right, it adds another another punch to this idea, right? Another insight into this idea of everybody saying the same concept, that the exile is an exile. If when you a spiritual exile, when you don't realize that you were spiritually in exile, right? But that we're adding on that, and that could be that's what caused the physical exile, because they didn't realize that they were in exile spiritually. Any questions or comments? Okay, let's move on. So let's continue. So it says over here that the age of Yaakov, right? Just an interesting point, which I'm not going to answer today, just to throw out there. You could ask a trivia question on your Shabbos table, right? Or with friends. Yaakov is different than everybody else when it speaks about their death, the years of his life. Everybody else, when it speaks about Adam, when it speaks about Avram Avinu, Yitzchak, Rivka, Sarah, right? When Rivka actually doesn't mention her life, but how long she lived. But Sarah, right? Even Moshe Rabbeinu at the end. When it speaks about when it says the years of their life, it says it only after they passed away. Only after they passed away, Sarah passed away, and then it says how old she was. Right? Abram passed away, and then it says how old he was. Yaakov's still alive. He only dies at the end of this week's parsha. We're going to see. He still so many. It says it was the last year of his life, or was it the last 30 days of his life? Right? But Yaakov is still alive, and it mentions how old he was even while he was alive. While he was alive, right? Which is an interesting point. Just something to point out, something to impress your friends, right? Or just have a discussion. Why is it? And the commentaries speak about this, right? There's commentaries that speak about it, but why is it that by Yaakov, it changes it up a little bit and mentions the years of his life while he was still alive and not after his death? It's an interesting question that commentaries speak about. Okay, so then it says, it came close for the dates of Yisrael to die. He called his son Yosef, right? He said, and if I find favor in your eyes, please put your hand by my bris milah, right? Because to swear, you're supposed to do a swearing by a holy thing, and the only obligation of a mitzvah that they had at the time, we're still on page 268, the only obligation that they had at the time was a bris milah. They had no other obligation of a mitzvah, so that was considered like the only spiritual mitzvah of a place that they had. So he says, please swear to me that you're going to do with me kindness and do not bury me in Mitzrayim. Right? He said, I want to be buried with my forefathers, right, in Marsa Machpelah, right, in Hebron, right? But Yomer Shavali, he said, swear to me, and he swore to him, and Yisrael, Yisrael sort of got up. He was able to sit up in bed. All right, so the commentaries just point out, sort of in the question and answer, the commentaries point out, why did Yaakov need to make Yosef swear? What, he didn't trust him? Right? Like you make a whole big deal. Swear to me, right? Hello, you asked me for a favor. You're my father. Of course I'm going to do it, right? Like, why did he make him swear? So the commentaries say that because that he did this on purpose, that when Yosef's going to have to ask permission from Paro to do this. Because again, even though Yosef was second in command, but there was a rule that you couldn't be buried, you can't leave Egypt, right? There was all these rules. So Yosef, Paro would say, hey, listen, okay, so he said, listen, my father made me swear. He said, so therefore what? Okay, so break your promise. But he says in Midrash that Yosef Paro had Yosef swear something. What? I know we didn't talk about this in the beginning of Parshas Miketz, but it says that in Parshas Miketz, it says that the Midrash goes into details about the whole conversation of Yosef had with Paro when he was interpreting the dream, and before he interpreted the dream, he was finding out his knowledge, and they were going on different languages, and Yosef knew something that Paro didn't know. What was that? Lashon HaKodesh, the Hebrew language, right? Lashon HaKodesh, the biblical language, which Paro didn't know because why would he know it, right? But Yosef knew it. So Paro made Yosef swear, right, that he can't reveal this to anybody, that he had more knowledge than Paro, right? Because Egypt was a cultural and knowledge, and a country based off knowledge and culture. And if people found out that Yosef knew more than Paro, they might start questioning his leadership. And so he made him swear that. So Yaakov now made Yosef swear that he's not bury him here, and now Yosef could say, "Listen, if you want me, if you tell me to break my promise, and promises don't mean anything, swearing means nothing, so then I can break my promise and my swear to you that I'm not going to reveal this." So he had Paro in a catch-22 sort of kind of thing, but that's why Yaakov made Yosef swear. So of course, he trusted him. Right? It wasn't because of a lack of trust, but he was sort of giving him the ammunition to be able to ensure that Yosef had a way to deal with Paro to be able to make sure that he could get him out of Mitzrayim and bury him in the Marsa Machpelah in Hebron. Very interesting. Okay, let's continue. The parsha continues. It says, "Vayachar dvarim ha'elu," was after these things. But Yosef was told to Yosef that your father is sick, right? And he took his two children, Manasseh and Ephraim, right? He took his two children, Manasseh and Ephraim, right? V'yaged liYaakov was told to Yaakov, Yomer hine bincha Yosef balacha. Yosef is here, right? And Yisrael got strong, v'yeshiv al hamita, and he got strong and he sat on the mita. He sat up on the bed. So first of all, it says that who told Paro this? Who told Yaakov? Who told? It was told to Yosef, right? Who told this to him? Right. So some say that it was Ephraim, right? Ephraim, right? Manasseh and Ephraim. Ephraim, the younger child, right? The younger child actually was learning with Yaakov, and he was learning with Yaakov. Manasseh, the older child. As we know from last week's parsha, he was sort of the interpreter. He was involved in politics. He was involved in government. Of course, he was one of the tribes, like Yosef, a big tzaddik. Right? But Ephraim was learning, and he came back to the father and said, hey, your Zeta, right, is not feeling well. You should come. And so that's who told him. It says it actually was a day away, right? So he comes. And so the Torah goes out of its way to tell you that when Yosef came and Yaakov was told that Yosef came, that Yaakov, Vayeshev al hamita, he sat up on the bed, right? We're on the top now of 270. Right, so the Talmud speaks about this, and many speak about this. He had strength, he got strength, right? So that when you go to visit the sick, right? When you go to visit the sick, you give the sick person 1/60th of strength. I think the number was 1/60th of strength, right? You give them strength, and that's what Torah is telling you, that the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick, is such an important mitzvah. You give them just by your actual presence and just hearing that someone's coming to visit them, lifts their spirits and gives them a jolt of energy to be able to sit up on the bed. Others say, Rashi quotes this, that the reason why Yaakov made sure to sit up is Kvod Malchus, the honor of the king. Even though Yosef was his son, right? Even though Yosef is his son, Yaakov felt that you still have to show that respect for the Malchus, for the king. And how much more so we have to remind ourselves how we have to show proper respect to our rabbis, right? To older people, people that are respected in the community, especially our rabbis, right? That it says in the Talmud that this is something, even if they're younger than you, right? If they're older, whatever it is, Yaakov was his father. For the king, so how much more so for a Talmud Chacham, for a Torah scholar, that we have to show the proper respect. The Talmud tells us, Rava said, how ignorant are the people from Babel that kamu, they stand up lifnei Sefer Torah, they stand up for a Sefer Torah, they don't stand up in front of a Talmud Chacham. Right? He says that Sefer Torah has a Torah in there, but a Talmud Chacham is a living Sefer Torah. Right? So he said, how ignorant are the people of Babel that they stand up for the Sefer Torah, but they don't stand up for a Talmud Chacham. We have to. I'm not going to expand on this, but it's just something to remind ourselves, sort of just taking this out of here. It's talking about a melech, a king, but and Yaakov felt that he had to sort of sit himself up. He was sick. It was his son, right? So how much more so we have to show the proper respect for a Torah scholar. So now let's continue. So Yaakov goes ahead and gives a whole history to his son Yosef about where he buried his mother, right? And we were on the way back, right? And I didn't bury her on the way, right? Sorry, that was before, right? Now he tells him, I apologize. And that's what he said before. Over here, he tells God bless me in Eretz Canaan. And he said, I will make you many, right? And I'll make you many. He said, Va'ata now. And this I want to talk about a little bit. Verse 5. Your two children that was born to you here in Mitzrayim before I came, right? Before I came, Lihem, they're for me. Ephraim and Manasseh, Keruvim and Shimon Yuli. Ephraim and Manasseh will be like Reuven and Shimon, right? This is where he makes Ephraim and Manasseh part of the 12 tribes. And we know that Ephraim and Manasseh is part of the 12 tribes. Levi, right, is sort of taken out because they become the priests and they don't inherit a land in the land of Israel and in the encampments of in the desert when they were traveling. They were sort of with the Mishkan, they were a separate encampment. They're not considered part of the 12 tribes, but for certain dealings, they're not considered part of the 12 tribes. Right? And Yosef was split in half. So Yosef is considered also sort of out of it, and Ephraim and Manasseh take that out. And this is where they become Reuven and Shimon, they're going to be like, for me, like Reuven and Shimon. Right? So the commentaries just ask a few things. Number one, right, we're going to talk about this question in a minute when we talk about another point. What was special about Ephraim and Manasseh? Like, why were they chosen? Reuven, I'm sure, had many children that were special. Yehuda had many children. Levi had children. Kahas and Merari, right? They had children that were great and great people. Why did Yaakov decide to choose Ephraim and Manasseh to elevate them to a status of their own shevet, their own tribe, right? That's question number one, which we're going to talk about in a minute when we speak about the blessings. So we bless our children, Ephraim and Manasseh. That's also in this week's parsha. Right. The other question that the commentaries ask, why did Yaakov have to go ahead and say that before I came down to you, your children that were born before I came down to you, right? Your children have been born. Are you two eldest? What was the point that he had to make out? He had to ensure and say, before I came down here and our family merged together, I only want those two children that were before that. What was he trying to bring out with this point? So to answer these questions, we're going to ask one more question. And as I said, right, then he goes ahead and he says, and this is where he goes ahead. He goes ahead and he tells him, that your mother Rachel, I wasn't able to bring her to Hebron, right? But she died on the way, right? And then he tells like this. He says, we're going to get back to, if we have time, we'll get back to them. Let's skip a little bit to verse 13. Second. Yeah. So verse 13, so goes ahead and he places his hands, right? He speaks about before and speaks about how he's going to go and give them blessings, right? Vayikach Vayotzi Yosef Vayikach Yosef Shnehem. He took both of them as Ephraim b'mino Mishmol Yisrael, but Manasseh Mishmolo Yemin Yisrael. So he put Ephraim, who is the younger one, on Yaakov's right, which is his left hand, right? Right, will be his left hand, right? And he put Manasseh Bishmolo to his left, which would be the Yemin Yisrael, will be the right hand, right? I do this with my Ezzy all the time. He says, Daddy, and when he's facing me, he said, so this is my right hand, that's your left hand, even though looks like we're the same side, right? But since he's facing me, right, so that's his right, and this is my left. So he put Ephraim on Yosef's right, which would be on his left, and he put Manasseh on his right, which on his left, which would be the right of Yaakov. And what he wanted Yaakov to do is to put his hands and bless them, and put his right hand on Manasseh, who was the older one, the Bechar, and his left hand on Ephraim, which was the younger one. And what happens? Vayisach Yisrael es Yemino. Yisrael takes his right hand and puts it on Manasseh, and then he puts on Ephraim, and he puts his left hand on Manasseh, and he goes like this, and this now has become like, accepted as a blessing, like this, like what, like this, right? And probably it's because this is what he did, right? He switched it around, right? So call Vayvarach Yosef, and he blessed Yosef. Vayirmer, and he said, right? I said Salachta Avoisai, and he goes and he speaks about Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? And then he says like this, the famous blessings. Hamalach Hagolo. See, who doesn't know this? We say this for Kriya Shema, right? At night. Hamalach Hagolo. See, right? The angel, right, that Agoel that redeemed us, see me Mikora from all danger. Yivarach Hasanarim, he said, bless the children. Vivarach Behem Shemi, and bless them with his name, Hashem Avosai, in the name of our forefathers. Avram, Yitzchak, Yigular Bekarva Aretz, right? Right? And then it continues, right, with the end of the blessing, right? So, what's it called again, right? And until the end of days. So the commentators want to know, and then what happens? But Yosef sees that because he was like this, and he made the blessing, right? And the Yosef sees that he switched the hands. He says, "No, father, this one is the older." And Yaakov says, "Hey, I might be old, but I'm not senile yet." Right? I know which one's older, right? And I still this is of course Manasseh is going to be great, but Ephraim is going to be even greater. And the commentary is saying because he's going to have Yeshua, the second leader of the Jewish people, going to come from him, right? And therefore, out of respect for Yeshua, right? That's why he switched the hands and he put the right hand on Ephraim instead of Manasseh, right? And then sort of that's the end of this chapter. Then he tells Yosef he's going to get Shechem, right? And it sort of continues, right? And then he says, and then it says Lemar, and then he continues, Yivarach b'yamahu Lemar, and he blesses verse 20, the bottom of 272. Yivarach, right? B'yamahu Lemar, he blesses them in that day. Yivarach b'cha Yisrael Lemar, Yismach Elakim K'Ephraim and Manasseh, right? Yismach Elakim, God should bless, right? K'Ephraim and Manasseh, right? And he put Ephraim in front of Manasseh, and again, it points out that he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Right? So, as we know, right, we bless our children, Yismach Elakim K'Ephraim and Manasseh. This is what we do, and this is where we got it from this week's Parshah. And we bless our children, K'Ephraim and Manasseh, right? Because it says, and by them you should bless your children. The Torah sort of gives us that mandate, and we bless our children, Ephraim and Manasseh. So the question again is, right, why Ephraim and Manasseh, right? Why not Yismach Elakim Reuven and Shimon? Yismach Elakim Avram and Yitzchak, right? 1 second, right? Avram and Yitzchak, right? What do we do for our girls? We do the matriarchs. We say Yismech Elakim Kasar Rivka Rachel Leah. Right? For the girls, we do the matriarchs. So why don't we do Yismech Elakim Kavram Yitzchak and Yaakov, our forefathers? Right? What's special about Ephraim and Manasseh? Again, this sort of adds on. Right? He made Ephraim and Manasseh special tribes, right? Why did the Torah have to go ahead and mention specifically that Yaakov said before I came down, right? Only because it was before I came down. And again, now over here, why is Ephraim and Manasseh again singled out, right? That all for eternity, all Jewish kids, all parents bless their boys, Ephraim and Manasseh, and not by any other tribes or even Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So we spoke about that last week, right? And we said, it was 2 weeks ago, maybe, and we said that actually she was, again, there was a Jewish and not Jewish, but she was actually, the Midrash tells us that she was actually the daughter of Dinah, right? When Dinah got molested raped by Hanoch, right? By Shechem, sorry, right? So she had a daughter, and that was her daughter, and she ended up in Egypt. And I don't want to go back into that. I'll be happy to talk to you about it afterwards, right? But that's who it says from. So the commentaries, again, similar commentaries all sort of expand on this, right? But the idea that the commentaries say is that the reason why he chose Ephraim and Manasseh, and the reason why he specifically said before I came down, is because Ephraim and Manasseh were the first people to be born, right, in exile, sort of say, right, in exile in a foreign culture, right, with the father, of course, that was educating them, but their father was a ruler. They had all the means that they could have been like, in every VIP club and accepted to the highest schools and probably get away with everything. Their father was a second in command, and it was like a dictatorship. It wasn't like even like political. It was more like a dictatorship. They could have had everything. They were wealthy, and they could have got anything they wanted, and they still stayed true to the culture of the Jewish people. Right? They still became worthy of becoming tribes. right? Not just, okay, they cruise and they put on their tefillin and they do things. They grew and they became worthy to be tribes of the Jews. The same as Reuben and Shimon. They were at the same level of Reuben and Shimon, right? That we go ahead and we bless our children, Ephraim and Manasseh, to remind every child that it doesn't make a difference where we are. We're in exile. We're in Eretz Yisrael. We're in the times of the temple. We're in the times of the hardest time with persecution, or hardest time spiritually because we're doing okay and we want to just melt into the culture that we're in. No, we remind our children of Ephraim and Manasseh, like Ephraim and Manasseh, right, that they didn't have any structure. And that's why Yaakov specifically says, before I came down, because they didn't have any support system. They didn't have anything. They were living in Nowheresville, Utah, right, or Arkansas, or whatever it is, with no structure before internet, and before travel was easy. They had nothing. And they literally had no infrastructure. They only had their father, their mother. And that's specifically why Yaakov mentions before I came there, because once I came down with me and my children, we set up base medrash and we set a shul, we had schools, right? So now there was infrastructure again. Okay, so they became great, excellent, right? But this special nakuda, the special point that they grew and they became so great, without any infrastructure, right? With everything piled up against them. That's who we bless our children, right? And that's what Yaakov said, I want them to become another tribe. Because this is a lesson that we have to teach, because Yaakov knew that we're going to go into exile. Yaakov knew that we weren't always going to have a base of Mikdash with us. Yaakov knew that we're going to have struggles with culture that we live in, both in if it's a spiritual struggle or a physical struggle. He knew that we were going to have that. And therefore, he's telling, we always have to remind our children that you can overcome it. And that's really the matriarchs all had the same thing, right? Sarah, again, she started with Avram. So Avram had that, but he was this himself. But Yitzchak, whose father did he have? He had Avram as a father. Yaakov had Yitzchak as a father and Avram as a grandfather. But Rivka, she had Besuel as a father and Lavan as a brother. Rachel and Leah had Laban as a father and living in Haran without any infrastructure. So again, a similar idea. The matriarchs all had a similar idea as what Ephraim and Manasseh, and that's how we bless our children, to remind them and to instill this important lesson, an important Jewish philosophy, that we could stay true to who we are. Of course, if we have an infrastructure, which Baruch Hashem we do, we have a shul, and we have classes, and we have rabbis, and we have schools, right? But even if we don't have that, or even if we have that, but there's so many other things pulling us aside, no, we could stay strong, and not only could we stay strong, we could grow to be a level of Ephraim and Manasseh who became tribes. We can excel and could grow in our spirituality. It doesn't make a difference how old we are. It doesn't make a difference how young we are. It doesn't make a difference where we live, right? Or what infrastructure we have. Of course, if we have a bigger infrastructure, it's even easier. But we can always grow and take that next step and say we can become closer to our Father in heaven. We could get closer to our spirituality, right? And that's why Yaakov picked Ephraim and Manasseh, and that's why he chose them to be tribes, and that's why he specifically said, before I came down, because there was no infrastructure, and that's why he also said that we're going to bless all the Jewish children, right, with Ephraim and Manasseh. Right? And this is, again, a tremendous, tremendous lesson to reinstill. And every time we say this blessing, our children, or when we say, or just in general, we hear people blessing this, right, we have to remember this important lesson and instill this in our families, that we could always grow. It doesn't make a difference what the infrastructure is. We always have a connection with our Father in heaven. We can always get closer to him. Any questions or comments? Okay. So we're going to stop shortly. The rest of the next part of the parsha, Yaakov goes ahead and says, I want to reveal the end of days. He calls all the children, and then it says that it was hidden from him, right? I'll tell you what happens in the end of the days, and then it doesn't, and then he doesn't. Then he starts giving his children blessings, right? So Rashi says that it was hidden from him because, and one of the commentaries say, why was the end of days hidden? he knew it, but when he was wanted to reveal to his children, it was hidden. He says because it's the reason why we don't know when the end of days is going to be is because if we know when the end of days we're going to be, right? So then we'll say, oh, let's just wait like a few years before, and then we'll change our ways, right? Or you know what? I'm not gonna. It's gonna be. I'm never gonna make it. I'm already whatever, and it's another 100 years, and I'm not gonna make it. So then forget it. Right? So therefore, it was never revealed to us when the end of days. We know that we daven the Mashiach could come at any moment. There's an idea that there's this fixed time when Mashiach has to come, but also we could bring Mashiach earlier. Right? And I want to get into that topic right now, but that's sort of why it was hidden from him. Then the next few pages, the next few psukim, even the next paragraph, goes ahead and speaks about the blessings of the children, right? And it says, I just want to speak about one of them, right? It says by Yisachar on page 278, verse 14, right? It says, Yisachar chamar garam rovetz bein ha-misrafim, right? Yisachar is like strong boned like a donkey. He rests between the boundaries, right? So Yisachar, we know, is known for Yisachar and Zvulun, right? The famous peace partnership of Yisachar and Zvulun, right? Which we'll talk about for a few minutes, right? Zvulun, and let's just go back for a second. Zvulun, which is verse 13, it says Zvulun will go and ride ships in the ocean, and it's referring to that Zvulun will be successful in business, right? And Yisachar was known as the teachers and the people learning all day, right? So there's something called the partnership of Yisachar and Zvulun. It's a real partnership. We spoke about a little bit about this when we spoke about the blessings of Yaakov and Esav and Yitzchak's, when we spoke about why Yitzchak liked Esav, and we spoke about this a little bit, and hopefully we'll talk about this another time also later when it comes up. I just want to talk about this a little bit. There's a concept of, it's actually a contract in the Code of Jewish Law, in the Shulchan Aruch, where you can make a contract like Yisachar and Zvulun, where Yisachar and Zvulun had a partnership, a contract where Yisachar went out to the sea, was a businessman, and then he supported Zvulun went out to the sea and he was a businessman, and then he supported Yisachar, and he supported Yisachar for their learning. They were learning all day, and it says that since they did that, Zvulun got the reward that Yisachar got when they were learning because he supported him. And that's a concept that we have, that when you support Torah, right? If it's whatever Torah you're supporting, if it's a program, if it's a class, if it's a school, right? You're supporting kids learning, you're supporting a kollel, you're supporting an individual, whatever it is, right? You're supporting Torah study, right? Even if you don't make that contract, there are people that sort of have a contract with a certain individual, right? But when you donate to that to ensure that there's more learning Torah, right? You get the reward of the Torah that's being learned by that, right? That's a way, even though let's say you can't learn so much, you don't know how to learn so well, you're trying, you're growing, but by supporting Torah, right? You get the reward, and hopefully we'll talk about this more. We don't have that much time left today, but we'll try to talk about this more at a later time and expand on this a little more. But it's always good to remind ourselves that when we support Torah, right, our schools that teach our children Torah, our institutions of people that are learning Torah themselves, right, we become partners in that Torah learning, right? It's a great reward. Besides that, we're helping other people out of tzedakah. We're also getting the benefit of the reward of the learning of the Torah that happened. But when I want to talk about Yisachar for a second, so Yisachar chamar garam, Yisachar is like a donkey, right? So the commentary is asking, like, why a donkey? Why not a horse, right? A horse is, more fancy. It's a nice, beautiful horse. It runs faster, right? A horse is definitely more of a respected animal than a donkey, right? So why a donkey? So the different commentaries say different things. But one of the explanations given is that a donkey has the longest stamina, and a donkey also, it says a donkey has the ability to hold a tremendous amount of weight. And a donkey is able to sort of walk even when it's like half asleep kind of thing, right? It's like sort of, it has that stamina being able just to carry tremendous amount. Yes, it doesn't go very fast, right? It doesn't go very fast like a horse, right? Or other animals, but it has that stamina being able to go very far and carry a big load and just to continue moving. And it says that that's what Yisachar was, and that's what it means by growing in Torah. Growing in Torah is not just trying to sprint ahead and jumping to learning things or doing things that you might know. No, it's the stamina, it's the consistency, it's the movement, it's being able to carry the load and say, yes, I know that I have a load on my shoulder. I'm going to take on new things. Might have some pressure from family or friends or pressure from other people or my partners or whatever it is. If I decide to close my business on Shabbos or if I decide, to move closer to shul, my neighbor, wow, what, you're going to do that, right? There's going to be pressure, right? But a donkey, a chamar, is able to handle all the weight, right? It has a tremendous, it's like the bones of a donkey, right? They're strong, right? And it has that stamina. Just continue to do it, and then you get to your destination, right? Being able to carry all that load, and that's Yisachar. That's how you grow in Torah. That's how you grow in your spirituality. Not by trying to, be a horse and go quickly or do a quick sprint and make it all fancy on the external. It's the work. It's the stamina. It's the consistency that one has. That's how we grow, and that's a special. That's why Yaakov said a Yisachar is like a chamor, like a donkey. Okay, we're gonna skip the rest of the blessings, right? It goes through all the different tribes, right? And then at the end of this, it says, if you go to then at the end then again he commands page 282. Again he commands Yosef. All right, he said, I'm going to die soon, and he said again he commands them to make sure not to bury him here and to take him to Marsa Machpelah, right? Where Avram is buried, and Rivka and Leah, right? And all those where all the forefathers are buried. Right? And then it says that finally it says that Yaakov died. Vayikva, verse 33, Yaakov dies. Right? It says that Yosef fell on his face and he kissed him, and then it goes through that they embalmed him. And I don't want to get into this. There's a lot of talking. Why did they do this? Why not? What does it mean? How can it be that they embalmed him? Right? But I'm not going into that right now. There's a lot to talk about that. But and then it says there was just a big Abel Gadol. There was a big procession of the funeral going all the way to Hebron, and everybody stopped. It says there was Hanan and others all came out to show respect to Yaakov, right? And again, Paro says, go and bury him like you swore. And again, that's what we spoke about. It says in bottom of 284, verse 6, go bury your father like you swore to him. Again, that's reinforcing what we said before. That's why Yaakov made him swear, because he knew that was the only way that he was going to get him out of there. Right? And then the rest of the parsha continues. And then, so I just want to bring out one more point, and then we'll end with this. Then it says that they buried him. So in verse, and then it says he returned down to Mitzrayim. There's a lot of midrashim over here that Esav got in the way, right? And he said, no, I'm going to be buried there. And then it says that Chushim ben Dan he was deaf. And he said, like, what's going on? What's holding up the procession? What's going on? What's holding up to bury Yaakov? And he says, well, Esav is making a big deal. Right, so it says the Chushim ben Dan went ahead and he hit Esav and chopped off his head, and his head actually rolled into the Marsa Machpelah. It says that Esav's head is buried in Marsa Machpelah, right, because he was getting in the way of burying Yaakov. There's a lot to talk about that. Why was only Chushim ben Dan? Why was everybody else sort of talking to him? And just very quickly, the point, and I don't want, again, there's a lot to unravel over here and a lot to talk about why he did it. But the point I just want to bring out, and it's not what I wanted to, the last thing I wanted to say, but the point I want to bring out is the commentaries say that Esav was saying, no, I'm the oldest one, and I should really be buried, and the oldest one should be buried. And they got into a whole back and forth. They said they sent Dan down back to Mitzrayim to get the contract that Yaakov made with Esav to say that he's the oldest one, right? And they sort of got engaged with Esav, and they sort of lost. Again on their level. They sort of lost the perspective of what actually was happening. That Yaakov was just hanging around here. Yaakov Avinu would be hanging around without getting buried. right? And Chushim and Dan, who was deaf, he didn't hear all that. He didn't get all connected. But when he just heard that Yaakov was not being, the proper respect was not being shown to Yaakov, and he was being held up by Esau, right? And Esau was holding up Yaakov being buried, which is, again, a tremendous disrespect for anybody, but especially Yaakov Avinu, especially the grandfather. He said, there's no words to be done. We just have to move Esav out of the way and get him out of the way and just continue with burying Yaakov. And the commentaries say, many commentaries expand on this. There's tremendous lesson. But a lot of times we get caught up in a conversation and we lose focus of even why we started this conversation. We lose focus that a mitzvah is not being done. We're losing focus that someone's not being taken care of. We're losing focus that whatever let's say a shul or whatever they want to try to implement a policy or to do something, or the rabbi says something and people start. We lose focus. We get caught up in conversation. We lose focus on the point, and a lot of times the point that we're trying to fix or trying to take care of gets lost in the conversation, right? And it's actually one of the ways that evil inclination tries to get us to do start answering this and saying that and that person, and we sort of lose focus. And no, we want to grow. We want to learn more Torah. We want to come to class. We want to start eating a little more kosher. We want to keep a little more Shabbos. But the evil inclination is going to say, well, your friends and your business and your that, and really is it really proper? And that gets you into a whole conversation, right? And that conversation that gets us to move away from the actual important points. And that's a lesson that we can learn from Chushim and Dan, right? Where he was sort of, by being deaf, he didn't get caught up in the conversation, and he focused on what actually was happening, where Yaakov Avinu was not being buried. The last thing I do want to talk about, and before I talk about that, because that is the last thing I want to speak about, the end of the parsha then goes ahead and speaks about how the Jewish people lived in Mitzrayim, right? And Yosef was getting older, and all his brothers, and Yosef said that God is going to redeem the Jewish people, and it speaks about that Yosef, Vayomas Yosef died, Ben Ve'eshem Shana, Yosef was 100, Ve'esher Shanim, Yosef was 110 years old when he died. The last thing I want to talk about, and this is such a powerful point, commentaries, Ramosha Feinstein, many others, last time I saw was Ramosha, but many others, earlier commentaries speak about this also. If you go to verse 15 on page 286, it says, Vayaru Ache Yosef Kimei Savim, the brothers of Yosef saw that their father passed away. Vayomru, and they said, Lo Yismeinu Yosef, right? And they said, right, that maybe Yosef is going to try to get back at us. And all the bad that happened to us. Yosef, Lamer, they commanded Yosef, say, of Lamer, Avicha Tziva, Lefnei Moscha, Lamer, your father commanded before his death to say, Kosam Yosef, this is what you say, Yosef, Anna, Sana, right? Please, right? Pesach, forgive your brothers, right? Forgive your brothers because of what they did. And it says that right, as he fell under and Yosef told them, verse 19, Yosef, don't be scared. Can I do any better instead of God? You guys thought for bad, right? And God thought this for good. Al tiro, don't be scared, right? It's going to be all okay, right? It's going to be all okay. And that's this, that's this part. The commentaries say that if you notice, right, they point out, you notice Yosef never said, I forgive you. Yosef never said, right, Mochalach, Pesha, right, I forgive you, whatever the words will be that the Torah say, right? It doesn't say, Ani Mochalachem, Pesha Lachem. Yosef says, what am I, better than God, right? You guys thought for bad, God thought for good, don't be scared, right? I'm not going to have any retribution, right? You're all going to live here, it's fine. But Yosef never goes ahead and says, I forgive you. And the commentaries point out that we know that there's a famous historical thing that happened in Jewish people, right? And we read about this both on Tisha B'Av and on Yom Kippur, called Asaru Ruge Malchos, the 10 martyrs, right? The 10 martyrs, we read about it both on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur, in the Musaf, and on Tisha B'Av, right? In the Kinnos, right? And it talks about the 10 martyrs, the 10 great Jewish leaders during the end of the Second Temple era that were killed. And it goes and says that the king was reading the Torah, and he says, hey, according to your laws, someone that sells someone into slavery, what's the halacha? Halacha is that the punishment is death. He said, I don't get it. Your forefathers, the 10 tribes sold Yosef into slavery, and they never got punished. So he said, there's never been anyone greater from that time until now in the same generation of 10 people that were on sort of on the same level. I'm going to take it upon myself, and you guys are going to be killed instead of them. And it says, they said, give us a few days. They went up, the Kohen Gadol, he had new ways, special names of God. He went up to heaven, and they told him this is a decree from God, and they accepted it, and it goes through how each one was killed. Rabbi Kiva was one of them, Rabbi Gamliel, right? These great rabbis were killed because of that. So they asked, one second, right? Why were they killed? Yosef said not to worry. And the commentaries say, and many say, because Yosef never went ahead and actually forgave them. Again, we're talking about we can't say this, the commentaries say this, and again, on their level, but Yosef never went ahead and says, I forgive you. This is the act of God. Don't worry, I'm not going to have any retribution. We're going to live kumbaya, we'll be fine. But he never actually said, I forgive you. Right? And Rav Moshe Feinstein and many others, again, go ahead and say how important it is that we have to say, I forgive you. And there's a special prayer that we say before called Nidre, right? It's called Tefillah Zakai, and we go ahead, we say, B'pem Maleh, I forgive anybody that harmed me. We go ahead and specifically speak out how we say we forgive people. Right? We have to say it. We can a lot of times say it's okay, don't worry about it. How many times do we say those words, right? All these cliches, all these adjectives, but we never actually say the words, I forgive you. And look what happened, because Yosef didn't actually say those words, I forgive you, right? Because if you don't say those actual words, you could dress it up whatever way, but he's still holding some kind of grudge. He's holding some kind of grudge. And again, it could be they did something terrible. They sold them into slavery. But for us, we have to be the bigger people. We have to go ahead and forgive other people. And this is a tremendous lesson, a tremendous thing that we always have to remember, that not to use all these adjectives, say it's okay, don't worry about it, whatever, we'll get over it, it's in the past, all this stuff. Those are good, but you have to go ahead and say, I forgive you. I forgive you, right? You have to mean it. Don't just say it because you're saying it, but you have to mean it, right? And that's, again, another lesson that we learned from this week's Parsha. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Next week, it is likely that I'm going to have to cancel. I will inform the office to let everybody know, but I might have another conflict at this time. Everybody have a great evening.